Alright, so I'm going to tell you, this is kind of funny because about half of you already know exactly who I am, and at least half of the remainder saw me do the first few slides already. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about me first of all, and kind of give you some context on why I'm giving this talk. So first and foremost, I'm a Perl developer. I've got 13 years commercial experience with Perl. I gave my first talk at YAPC about 14 years ago. About 15 CPAN distributions, and I've been a contractor, I've been a permanent employee, I've been a freelancer. I've done many of the Perl roles. But I've also been a hiring manager. CTO at an enterprise software company until quite recently. We had a team of 40 developers-ish, most of whom were Perl. Spent a lot of time reading CVs, interviewing people, and dragging my co-workers in to interview people too, which we'll become a theme momentarily. And then finally, I'm a recruiter, and I run a recruitment agency called Perl Careers. I've been encouraging people to come and get pens, but actually I've given out near on 200 so far, which get in. They're quite expensive, but do come and help yourself to them. And we specialise in Perl developers in the UK. And the reason you should care about this is that I'm probably the only recruiter who's been on all four sides of the table. So I've been a developer looking for work under various guises. I've been roped into lots of interviews when I wasn't the hiring manager to interview people. I've been the hiring manager, and I've been a recruiter. And I'm hopefully going to show you how to write an awesome CV. One of the crucial aspects of writing a CV is to work out there are several different audiences for your CV. We're going to call gatekeepers. And we're going to start off with the HR person or recruiter. This is generally the first person who will see your CV. Their job is to try and work out whether or not your CV is going to go to somebody technical or not. And they generally don't tend to be technical themselves. The questions that they're trying to answer is, do you have the appropriate skills for the role? Oftentimes this will just be keyword matching because they don't have a good understanding of what the role actually entails. Just going to be pretty explicit about some of the skills you have there. And they generally only got a vague idea of what the important skills for a role are. Job descriptions tend to get written when HR bully hiring managers into writing stuff, and the hiring manager would much rather have just said, well, we're looking for a senior Perl developer, because anybody who is a senior Perl developer will know exactly what that means. And you end up with a bunch of keywords, and then you choose Git, Apache, a bunch of other stuff purely based on that. The HR person or recruiter is also going to be looking at, are you employable? Do you have any big gaps in your work history that you can't easily explain? We'll talk about ways of explaining gaps in your work history momentarily. If your LinkedIn profile is very different from your CV, that's obviously a red flag, and that happens. If you're an internal HR person, they're trying to figure out, are you going to be a liability to the company? Are you likely to leave the company in a huff after 4 months and sue them? And if you're an external recruiter, like me and Rick, they're going to be trying to work out, are you going to make them look like an idiot when you go into a role and you reveal that you've been fired from your last 5 jobs. Finally, this one's pretty important. They're going to try and work out if you are eligible to work in the UK. If there is any reason, your CV might give people cause to believe you are not eligible to work in the UK, and you are, put it in big letters at the top. Because recruiters don't want to waste their time setting up interviews for people who cannot accept a job at the end. That's everything I wanted to say there. So the next person who's going to look at the CV is the hiring manager, who's usually a senior technical person. I was going to use a picture of Grace Hopper here, but she looked a bit funny in her full Navy rig. I thought this was a nicer picture. Quite possibly your future line manager. This is a key point. They have much better things to do than to read your CV, and actually this applies to everybody who will be reading your CV. Reading CVs is boring, and they'll be skimming your CV looking for it. But really, she's trying to work out, is it worth investing her time taking you in for a phone interview, or taking you in for an in-person interview? Such as say, and the way they're going to do that is trying to work out, do you have the actual real commercial experience? You get a lot of CVs of people who've been sysadmins or have touched Perl once or twice applying for roles. Do you have the other required skills? And finally, for bonus points, do you have any big pieces of open source work you can talk about? Do you have any other interesting experience? In a second, we'll talk about, if you don't have a lot of open source experience, how you can kind of gussy that up anyway. We'll talk about stuff you do know. The third set of people are going to be the interviewing developers. These will be your future co-workers, and it would be nice to think when you go and interview somewhere they've been carefully selected as a representative sample. They haven't. The hiring manager has gone around, found out who is free to talk to you that afternoon, almost anywhere. They have no idea what they're doing, and most of what they're going to be trying to do in the interview is stave off boredom from the fact that they're reading a CV and they'd much rather be doing their real work. They're going to be trying to ask the questions, do you know about Perl? One of the worst ways that they'll do this, and this happens, is asking you random trivia questions they found on the internet. What does this snippet of code I pulled from a code site do? I went to interview at a company once who had a regular expression for calculating prime factors they wanted me to work through. And it was like, who comes up with any of that thing? Any kind of stupid questions about the comma operator will be familiar to people. This is a key point. You need to have interesting stuff on your CV to talk about with them instead, to stop them asking any technical questions. Finally, they're going to try and work out, can they work with you? Be friendly, you smile. You're going to be a bit nervous anyway. Do you get irritated and flustered by the inane technical questions? And finally, are you well presented? Rick's going to cover interviews, so Rick will tell you, present yourself well in interviews. Finally, remember that they don't do this for a living. You need to help them find interesting things to talk to you about. They're going to be reading through your CV, trying to look for words or phrases that they think are interesting that they can talk to you about. Your CV needs to try and help each of these three audiences. And I'm going to repeat that. Nobody wants to be reading your CV, really. Everybody's reading your CV as a result because they need to hire you or the hiring manager has told them to. You need to make it easy for them to answer their questions. Whew. So we're going to walk through some of the summary section now that you might put in. The summary section right at the beginning of the CV, and the way to get this absolutely wrong is to write something ridiculous about how you're a motivated self-starter, because nobody cares. It was all the rage in the 90s. Recruiters and HR people already think programmers are a bit weird, and if you put something like that on there, that's not going to help. Your hiring managers are deeply cynical people who have read lots of CVs and know that you just made this up, and your co-workers are going to think you're a twat if you write something like that. But the good news is that it's possible to do this really quite well and to write a fairly compelling summary. What you need to bear in mind is you need to give each of the three audiences exactly what they're looking for. So, starting with the HR person, you need to tell them they're reading the right CV, basically. Find the job description and repeat it. I am a job description goes here with X number of experience, including, and the key keywords. You don't need to write a different CV for each job. Help. So there's going to be a lot of copy and paste there. Demonstrate understanding of the skills you have. If you just put a long list of keywords there, anybody can do that. It's not hard to put keywords on your CV. If you can pull out things that you've learned from the application of those skills, you've got something quite a lot more compelling there. If you can talk about what it is you like about DGIX class, what you like about Plaque and the other tools, it is much, much more convincing than simply a long list of technical keywords. Sorry, I'm rushing through this. I've got a lot of slides, and I'm not sure I've got that much time. Summary section for interviewing developers. I think I've skipped a section there. No, I haven't. For interviewing developers, give them something interesting to talk to you about. Any interesting technical projects that you've done. I've got no idea where I came up with automated cat treadmill from. But the more things you talk about, the more passion you can show about programming, the better. So, as an example here, if you get your summary section right, if you nail it, you have gotten yourself an interview at that point, assuming you haven't put anything else stupid on your CV further on, which we'll talk about. Nobody likes reading CVs. Put the important stuff succinctly at front. The next thing you'll probably want is a skills section. Talk about the important stuff at first and at length. Do not be tempted on a Perl development role to talk about Java server pages or any of the other random technologies you've touched on time. If you're applying for a senior Perl role and anything that's not Perl related takes up as much ink as even something like you've read the class mock documentation in detail, you're missing a trick there. Nobody cares. If you just have a long list of keywords like that, only the HR person or recruiter is going to care. They don't know what Linux traffic PR anyway. Also, this looks like every other CV. Break Perl out instead as a major heading with subheadings here. again, talk about your experiences as proof that you've actually used the technologies that you talk about. You'll show the hiring manager that this actually happened, that you actually had jobs that brought you into contact with Perl, and it'll give the developers interviewing you something to talk about. Show off your battle scars. Show off stuff that you could only have learned by actually doing stuff. Stuff that you gained from your experience, but also make sure if you're going to mention something like that, that you know what you're going to talk about in the interview when somebody brings it up. You can put in something slightly controversial, put in an opinion there. Again, somebody interviewing you who's reading through this is going to be able to bring this up as something to talk to you about. You can demonstrate your passion for development, and you can demonstrate your technical knowledge by people bringing this up in the interview. Oh yeah, I highlighted this because the words "I have some exposure to" is a great way of talking about technologies you don't know a great deal about. I just thought that was quite cute, and yeah, it's a nice way to introduce stuff you've played with a few times, without, yeah, if somebody then calls you on it, you can say, you know, wasn't a major skill. One thing I've seen done before that works quite well, slightly weird, is bolding out keywords. Technically, reading it will go, I wonder why he's done that, but it makes it nice and easy for people to find skills in there that they're looking for and not just skim it over. Okay, I hope that's for half my slides. You can use a similar sort of approach then for the non-Perl skills you want to talk about. A long list simply of operating systems you've used, other languages you've used, is not that interesting. Again, demonstrate understanding by giving opinions about the technologies that you've used. Did I just say that? I did. Opinions and insights about the technologies that you've used. Nothing wrong with showing a little bit of personality in the interview. You'll probably be nervous. It's nice to have something to talk about, something to joke about in the interview. Don't take that a step too far, obviously. You're not trying to do stand-up on there. The other skills section, right at the end of this is where you can put your XSL formatting objects, skills. Your skills with Spring and Tomcat, and all the rest of the stuff that people who are hiring you for a Perl developer role simply don't care about. Open source experience is the easiest way to prove that you actually care about programming, and it's also the presence of it is one of the few bits of technical screening that a non-technical person can do, in that have they put links to their open source experience on there. How much of it you have is going to kind of determine what you say about that. So let's say you've got really quite a lot of open source stuff. It should filter about as prominently as your skills section. For HR and recruiting people, these are basically hieroglyphics on a marble slab. They know it's important, they have no idea what it means, they know it's worth including on there. The interviewing developers will have lots to talk to you as a result of being up there. Pick out 2 or 3 of the projects you're most proud of and that you want to talk about the most. You don't need to list everything. You can name drop the other stuff you've worked on, link to your CPAN directory, link to your GitHub directory. Only do that if there's stuff there. I've had a bunch of CVs and linked to CPAN directories that were empty. And it's like, what, did you not think I was going to click on that link? Any speaking or writing you've done is good. If you've got a technical blog and it's good, link to it. If it's not good, just say that it exists. If you gave a lightning talk once, you still spoke at a conference, stick it in. Again, if you have lots of good stuff to put in here, it should be about as prominent as your skills section. If you put in a little less, if you've got a little less to talk about, still awesome. You should still put some stuff in for it. If you've been contributing to other projects, even if you didn't write them, talk about the projects you contributed to, or reflect in their glory. Link through again to your CPAN and GitHub modules, assuming you've got some. And even if you submitted a patch once to a project, you were still a contributor to it. It still shows passion about programming, and it still shows you're somebody who cares a bit about programming. If you spoke at your local Perl Monger technique, that still counts as speaking. Again, if you've got a Perl blog, if it's good, link directly to it. If you haven't, just mention that it's there. If you have less technical experience, I wasn't sure if this was in good taste, being how close we are to Remembrance Sunday, but get involved in the open source community. It's a great idea. But you can talk about almost anything technical that you've done. Talk about the app you built to split bills with the people you live with. If you've got an Arduino or Raspberry Pi, talk about it. If you've read something interesting, you implemented almost anything from it, again, talk about it. You're trying to show that you have passion for technology outside of work, but what's more, that passion can translate into actually being able to bring useful stuff to your workplace. Pretty much the same idea for online courses. In summary, if you don't have much open source experience, mention anything you did that shows that you do enjoy working with computers, but also go and get involved. Go and work on a module, go and submit a patch or something. It's good practice, and it's a lot more compelling than trying to gussy up experience that didn't exist so much. Work experience. You don't need to list every job, ever. If you are above the age of 25 or 26, and you worked in a pub when you were 16, nobody cares. 3 or 4 of the most recent and relevant jobs. You can lump up a whole bunch of jobs as a line item. Unless it's particularly interesting, a job title and some dates, be fine. Don't send long CVs, and nobody wants to read your CV. 3 pages max, I would say, on that. If you can get it down to 2 pages, even better. For each role, think about the key audiences that you have. The HR person wants some keywords to control F for. The hiring manager wants to know that you actually have a real programming role. And the interviewing developers want something interesting to talk about. So we're going to give them each, for each role, a single bullet point. Skills used. This is your chance to go full keyword smackdown and put in every keyword you actually use that you think a recruiter might care. A great source of these is the job description of the job you're applying for. Talk about the job you actually did. Mention what you were doing for that. This is to show you were actually a Perl developer. Did anyone work with me at this job? Do I have you did. Sorry. Put some interesting components of what you did there. Again, give the developers something to talk about. If you've got big gaps in your CV, make sure LinkedIn and your CV match up. They often don't, and it doesn't give a good impression to people reading it. The hiring manager will care. Make sure you have good answers. If you've got gaps in your CV, it's not the end of the world. If you get flustered in an interview about it, people assume you spent a couple of years in prison. So make sure you've practiced answering why these gaps exist. In terms of papering them up, if you went traveling, put it in as a job. Employers think that you went traveling for a few months as a career break is a good thing, and people get really weird about it. You know, oh, well, I went traveling for a bit. It's a good thing. If you're unemployed and looking, call it job seeking. If you did anything technical in that time, mention it as if it were a job. You're not trying to pretend it was a job, but you are trying to show you used that time productively and give people interesting things to talk about. A bit of a tip there. If you had a very short role that crossed a year boundary, you couldn't just put the year. You should definitely be honest about that, because people do check these kind of things. It's a lot easier to explain this in person to a hiring manager than it is to explain it to a recruiter. Right, boring stuff. What's the difference between these 2 CVs? The difference between these 2 CVs is this person doesn't have a degree, as you can tell by the fact they bothered to put an education section on there. There is almost no reason to put an education section on your CV unless you have no work experience whatsoever, or you did something particularly awesome, like you did a PhD in something computer sciencey. Leave it out, nobody cares what A-levels you got. Visa situation, put everything relevant right up there. If you need a tier 2 visa, put it right up there. If you live abroad but you want to move to the UK, make it clear. If you have a right to work in the UK, put it there. Obviously that applies to other companies. Give them all the information you need up front. If a recruiter thinks you cannot work in the country, your CV will go to the bottom of the pile. So if you can, make sure it's obvious to them. Rick's going to cover interviews in a great deal of depth, but read through your CV and make a list of 20 questions from your CV you think you might get asked, and then practice them. Write out some ideal answers to them. This actually works really well on phone interviews, because you can just read them off. But if you've got something you're particularly proud of there, you can work in your good answers to anything else. Nobody's looking for coherency in your answers. When you get asked a question in an interview, people are looking for you to demonstrate your knowledge and mastery of programming. In summary, write your CV for all 3 audiences, and then this one's a little bit of a pin for me. If you are job seeking, give me your CV and I'll help you rewrite it to get you an interview. Hey. Make sure you've got some interesting things to talk about on it, and keep it short. And that is it. We've got a small option at this, in a sec, we've got a small option at this point. So, who here is also planning to stay for Rick's talk on interviewing? Is that's pretty much everybody. Rick can come on right now and give his talk, and we can do a small Q&A at the end. We can stand up and walk around for 10 minutes. Does anyone have a strong opinion on what we should do for that?
I want to do a Q&A now, because otherwise I'll forget my questions.
Go for it. What do you want to ask?
What about scumbag contractors with lots of slotty 6 months?
There's a really simple answer to that, which is right that you're a contract position. People employing you, if it says contract, nobody cares. Contracts can last any amount of time.
There's lots of them. I mean, my CV would probably be 5 or 6 pages.
So why don't you start off with a couple of sentences in, I have been working as a contractor for X number of years in a variety of roles, and then pull out 3 interesting ones. That's what I'd do. Or your what? Hanson Associates. Write Hanson Associates as your long thing, and then say, here are some of the clients I worked for, or just do it as one simple thing. Your goal here is to pull out interesting things to talk about only. You don't have to, there's no kind of specific format it has to go to. You're just trying to convince people that you didn't spend a few years in prison, and also that you have some interesting things to talk about there. Yes?
What if you did spend a few years in prison?
You have absolutely no idea in that case. But you should definitely be upfront about it, because it's good to be honest. I probably wouldn't put it on the CV, I'd mention it to the hiring manager. I don't know how the French system works, Jerome.
An answer to that, John Simpson in the Telegraph has said the only people you ever get honest CVs from are people straight out of jail.
Yes?
Will your slides be online?
Will my slides be online? Yes, I plan to pimp the hell out of them.
Okay.
I flew in from Bangkok and it was expensive, and I'm going to milk this for everything it's worth. Yes?
I had previously been talking with people when I was doing stuff in contracting. I spent a long time trying to hold my CV to 2 sides, and they kept on saying, just pour more information in that I had removed, keep it short. How important do you think is the difference between the 2 and the 3 side?
I don't think it makes a big difference. I think if you think you have interesting things to say on the 3 sides, go for it. I think at the point where you're adding your 4th or 5th job description and it says what the other one said, get rid of it. If you have enough stuff you genuinely think is interesting for a 3rd side, go for it. Nobody is going to reject your CV because it's too long. Even if you put in a 12-page CV, as long as the first 3 pages are compelling, people are just going to go, that's weird, and they're not going to read after 3 pages. I mean, I think that's the point. It doesn't matter if you have a very long CV, just make sure people aren't having to hunt through it for interesting stuff.
So that's where you put your prison sentence.
That's what you've been prison sentence. Bury it at that, yes.
Is there a 4th audience which would be the bot that scans the CV for keywords?
So I think that's the hiring manager, but I think, as you say, I mean, at some companies that's not a technical person. I think in that case, if you've got keywords in there, but that's not all you're talking about, and you've got interesting stuff for developers, you know, I think that's going to be enough. But generally what happens is the non-technical person is a gatekeeper who then sends it to a technical person for review. I'm
just thinking the non-technical person won't see it unless it scores high enough on the keywords.
I think scores high enough. The non-technical person reading it has, if they're an external recruiter, a great deal of money at stake by sending your CV on and want to send your CV on. And if they're internal, they have targets to hit and they want to send your CV on. So as long as you look like a reasonable match for it, they'll send it on to somebody technical.
So leave off your education. All of it? I mean, a lot of places do stipulate their degree or
if it's stipulated a degree, put it on, but if you haven't put anything in your educational section and you've applied for a job that requires a degree, they'll probably assume you have one. I didn't have a degree until recently, and I did one late in life. And yeah, I never had an education, so I got some dreadful A-levels and never put it on. I got told my first couple of CVs I sent out for jobs were enigmatic, but I got told that in the interview. And that's the important thing. Your CV is purely there to get you an interview, get your seat, and get your bottom in a seat with the client.
Yeah, I don't have a degree, it's never been a showstopper.
I'm hiring at the moment.
Hey!
I'd like to say to anyone who's looking for a job is keep current, have so many CVs in, and talk to people on it. They'll have 5 days experience, and that's it. They haven't progressed any further.
Sorry,
They've only got Perl 5.8 experience, and they haven't got any modern Perl. They haven't, used free programs are open, you don't know about, what's DVIX, flash boost, anything like that, and we use all the modern stuff.
And so you're suggesting that highlighting the modern Perl experience is quite important?
Highlight it, but read all the new stuff you can, keep up to date.
Absolutely.
But those people can probably still get jobs in the city, right?
Or BBC.
But that said, I think that the market is so what can euphemistically called candidate-driven at the moment, which means there are lots more jobs than programmers. That if you give me somebody like that, I can get them a job. I mean, perhaps I can't get them a job with you, but there are enough desperate people. And as well, if you talk to them, and you like them, and they think the right way, and they've got open source experience, how long does it take to pick up a catalyst?
But a lot of people that I have interviewed have stayed and not moved on, and possibly some old people who don't necessarily want to move on.
Okay.
Who are you, by the way?
I'm Kevin,
Company?
InView.
Right.
I think we should let Rick have a go.
I've been trying to drown them out, just continue to answer questions.